Hello everybody, welcome to Coco's Crochet. I'm Litsa and today I'll be bringing you a slightly different video in our little mini series Crocheting with Blanket Yarn. I'll be sharing my tips and tricks that I've learned along the way, which I wish someone had shared with me a little bit earlier when I first started. And of course, if you have any tips and tricks that you would like to share with all of us, please do so in the comments down below. I always love learning something new, especially when it empowers me to be able to work more efficiently and more easily and create beautiful projects using all our different types of yarn. But today we'll be focusing on blanket yarn, and as I said, it's just my tips and tricks that I'd love to share with all of you. There's not too many. Some you may already know of, and some might surprise you, and some might just be something that you thought, oh, I thought about doing that and now I will definitely give it a go. So, you know, this is also a little mini series that I've created for all of you and for myself as well. For those of you who, and I will be referring to my clipboard, guys, and I will be ticking things off. As you know, I do love to, you know, keep a list because I don't want to miss out on anything that I've written down for you. So this is, as I said, a little mini series for those of you who have never worked with blanket yarn, who aren't sure what to do with the blanket yarn that you might have in your stash, and also for those of you that swore that you would never ever work with blanket yarn. So, as I said, I'm just going to share some of my tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. And some of you that may have just joined us, please go and watch our playlist on crocheting with blanket yarn. There are quite a few little cool projects in there. And of course, this video will be popped in that playlist as well. So, let me get my clipboard ready. Let's tick off the first page, our little introduction, because it's always very important. But before we get started, what is blanket yarn? Well, blanket yarn is classed as a number 6 bulky weight yarn. So it is quite thick. I have some here to show you here. So it's not extremely thick. There it is there. And that's what the end looks like. And of course, it comes in a variety of solid colors. Here we've actually got some sparkle blanket yarn. Can you guys see the sparkle in that? It's absolutely gorgeous. That's one of my favorite yarns. And then it comes in all types of colors, including striping, variegated. Some have got speckles through it. You know, it's quite a nice extensive range that you can get. So it is a beautiful, soft, squishy yarn. It is 100% polyester, which makes it so soft. And it does recommend on most ball bands that you use a 8mm hook. So there it is there. But you know, a 9 is good to have also, and we'll talk about hooks in a moment. But as I said, generally on a ball band, you will see that it recommends an 8mm hook. And the great thing about blanket yarn, which is I think one of the best qualities about it, is that it is machine wash and dryable, which is awesome, especially when you're creating things that you'll be using all the time. For example, your mind would go to blankets, obviously, for, you know, the use of blanket yarn. So imagine, you know, you would definitely be washing them quite often, and being able to wash and dry in a machine is a bonus. So they're all ticks for me as far as I'm concerned. Now, that was just a little bit of information on blanket yarn. Now, what are some of my tips and tricks? And there are only 10, so please stay tuned. If you've got something that you're working on, brilliant. If not, this won't take too long. So the main thing is to treat your blanket yarn with respect and understanding. When I say that, I mean understand the fiber that you're working with, just like you would with any yarn, obviously. Now, the yarn will help you create a project that will bring you joy, whether you keep it or gift it. Now, we all know that that's very important when we're crocheting, that it's not just about the end result, it's about the process as well, just like anything in life, I guess. Now, when you understand your yarn, the process of crocheting with it will be more enjoyable. As we just said, that's very important. And not all yarn behaves the same. Therefore, you need to adjust how you handle your blanket yarn. Learn to be friends. I think that's very important. So that's where the respect and understanding comes in, just like you would do that with your friends. Now, number 2, I suggest that you take the time to collect a few tools before you get started. I know that there's a saying that trade is you, something you're only as good as the tools you own or tools you use. Let's apply it to crocheting as well. So I know that we're all eager to jump into a project when we get a new yarn. I know I certainly am, and that's not unique to me, but I have learned along the way that if you give yourself a little time to play, which is still a lot of fun, let's be real, with the blanket yarn, the process and end result of your crochet project will be optimal. And that's what we want, to get the best use of this yarn to create the best project possible. Now, number 3, blanket yarn is a bulky number 6 weight yarn, as we mentioned a little bit earlier. And the hooks that I recommend you have in your collection when you're working with blanket yarn, as we said, the one that is always recommended by the companies is an 8, and I believe this one is the 8 without my glasses, but a 9 won't hurt. And I've also got a pink one somewhere which is actually a 10. Now, depending of course on your tension, you will need to go up or down hook sizes to create a project. So let's say, for example, with an amigurumi, we all know, and I don't have one here with me, that we need a thicker, a denser fabric because we don't want the fibers sticking out, that we fill it with. So you may need to go even down to a 7 possibly. That depends on you. Me personally, I use an 8mm for amigurumi, but if you're creating a different project like a blanket or a rug or whatever else it may be, the larger hook sizes would be very useful as well. And of course, depending on the stitch. So if you're doing a tighter stitch, like a cluster type stitch, I would go up a hook size. But if you're doing something like a window stitch or a V stitch, as examples, I would probably go to a 9. Now this basket, for example, was created using blanket yarn, and I used an 8mm hook because you want it to be able to be quite a dense fabric and to sit up nicely. And that's exactly what I meant when I was saying, you will have to adjust your hook sizes depending on your project and of course your tension. So that's where playing with your yarn comes into play. Ooh, pardon the pun. Anyway, number 4. It is very, excuse me, and the one thing that I didn't say, which I've written, see, got to read my notes. For those of you that may not have the larger hooks in your collection, which I didn't before I started buying bulky yarn like the blanket yarn, they're very quick and easy to buy and very cheap nowadays on Amazon and Temu. So a set of maybe 5 hooks and even some things like stitch markers, around $10, I think you'd be able to pick some up. So think of that, before or after you, or at the same time that you buy your yarn, that you don't have to spend a lot of money on hooks. They're just generic hooks, the ones I showed you, and they work very, very well with the blanket yarn. Now, number 4, invest in a darning needle with I'll show you mine, with a pointy sharp edge. Let's see if we can see it here, guys. Can you see that one there? Yeah, so it's got the bent end and it's sharp and a larger eye. Now, obviously, you're going to say to me, Lisa, of course it's got to have a larger eye because, it's a thicker yarn. Of course, I understand that you know that, but I just thought I'd point it out because when you go shopping, sometimes it's good for someone to put that in your head so that you remember it. But this bit here is very, like I said, the bent bit. Can you see it there better? It's very important because when you're going through blanket yarn, it'll make it easier for you to weave in and out. And it'll give you a much better end result. And it's easier to go through the fibers as well, the yarn fibers. So that makes it really, really useful. I absolutely love this needle. I didn't have a darning needle like that in my collection for a very, very long time. And ever since I got one, I've got this one and a green one, I always use them now. So they're not a very big investment. You might want to, if you haven't already got one, order some at the same time you order your larger hooks if you need to. So we spoke about that, and the eye, of course, to accommodate for the thicker yarn. Now, while we're talking about weaving in ends, this is very, very important, guys. So I've written it down and I'll make sure I read it to you. I need to tell you how important it is to make sure that you pay extra attention to this detail. I know that sometimes we think, oh my God, I've spent all this time on this and I've got to weave in all the ends. If I you know, don't do it perfectly, or if I just tie one up and I cut it, or if I just skip, you know, one return, it'll be okay. But with blanket yarn, it's imperative that you don't do that, because this yarn, it does fray a little bit. So you want to make sure, oh, do I have any here? It doesn't really show you here. I know it's very hard to see black, very poor choice, sorry guys. Now sometimes when you cut it up, see there? See that bit there? That bit there, see, it can fray a little bit. Well, there you go, that's a better example. So you want to make sure that you don't allow any of your yarn to escape. So what was I saying? Yes, very important to go one direction, then the other direction, and then back again. And as you're doing that 3 times, try to get into the fibers as well with your pointy-ended darning needle, and that way it'll make it extra secure. Now, when you complete those returns, tug slightly on your yarn, and when you snip it off, don't be alarmed, because you will see a little bit of fluff. As I said, and I showed you, that is just one of the traits of the blanket yarn. It's nothing to worry about. Then you just slightly, you know, take off that little bit of fluff, and then the rest will be secure. So it is very, very, very important that you make sure that you sew in your ends very, very well when you create a blanket yarn project, because, you know, after all, you've spent quite a little bit of time creating a beautiful, amazing project for yourself or for someone. You don't want it to fall apart the minute you wash it, or, you know, go to use it. So please make sure that you keep number 5, sewing in your ends, as one of the things in the back of your mind. That's super duper important. Now, number 6, you know, we've all got them. Well, most of us do, some form of them, whether it be, you know, a piece of yarn, a bobby pin, a safety pin, or a stitch marker. It can be as fancy or as, you know, simple as these. Very important. Most of us use them all the time. I certainly do. But it's very important when you have your blanket yarn, because when you're first learning to crochet with it, it's a little bit tricky sometimes to recognize your stitches. And also you're going to need it when you're creating amigurumi, because, you know, when you start your magic ring, you're going to definitely need one. But for me, they're actually an excellent little tool to always have next to you when you're crocheting, because you just never know when you're going to have to need one. And I pretty much use them in every single project that I create. It doesn't matter how long I've been using that type of yarn or creating that stitch, I always do like to have them handy. Now, when starting, so this is what was leading to this. So when you're starting a magic ring, when you're using blanket yarn, so a magic ring or a magic circle, whichever way you refer to it, and you crochet your first row. So in US terminology, it will be single crochet, UK double crochet. Try not to make them as tight as you normally would if you're using acrylic like DK weight yarn or worsted weight yarn. Reason being, and also you can't have them too loose, I understand that, but you might just want to make them a little bit looser, because when you go to tie in, pull in your end so that it, you know, makes the ring tighten, sometimes blanket yarn has been known to snap off. So to avoid that, try to crochet a tiny bit looser. Now, I don't have an example here, but while we're on the topic of, you know, how we crochet into our magic ring, you might also want to skip the first row. So you don't get like a little bubble, like a little lump, or like a little cone shape in your first row in a magic circle when creating amigurumi or the base of a basket, for example. Skip straight to the second row. So if it says 6 single crochet in the beginning, just go straight to 12, and that will alleviate or avoid you having that little peak that sometimes can happen with a bulkier yarn. So keep that in mind as well. Now, you're thinking, well, Litsa, what if I can't do that? What if I can't get, you know, right and you keep snapping off, well then simply just do maybe 3 chains, connect them, and then do your beginning row into the very first chain, and that will you know, make sure that you don't have that issue with the yarn snapping when you try to tighten your magic ring or circle. So number 8, oh yeah, this is a fun one. So when you're substituting blanket yarn in a pattern, for example, a blanket as an example, expect to produce a much heavier piece. The end result will be much heavier because blanket yarn is quite heavy. And this also, a much heavier piece. And also be aware that if you stick to the pattern as is, you're going to need a lot more yarn because there's a lot less meters or yardage in each ball of, like say, a 100 gram ball of DK acrylic versus a 100 gram ball of blanket yarn. Huge difference in the length of it. So be mindful of that. Don't just think, oh yeah, I used 4 balls to make that gorgeous blanket over there, I'll just get 4 balls of blanket yarn the same way, the same grams or ounces. It won't work that way, so keep that in mind as well. Now a heavier blanket, for example, a lot of people like the weighted blankets, may be very appealing to some, but not everyone, so be mindful of that, guys. Now, it's also very important to remember that you need to adjust your hook size. So don't get frustrated if you, which I know sounds very obvious, but sometimes we just get stuck into something and we're like, why isn't it working? You know, it says to use a 6mm, but you need an 8mm generally, unless you've got very, very loose tension, that is. And that's possible, of course, nothing wrong with that. Now, as I said, don't forget to adjust your hook size and your starting stitch count, because if you want to make the same size blanket, for example, that you made earlier using a DK weight yarn, you're definitely not going to have to, let's say it was 100 starting chain, like just chain had 100 to start with, you may possibly only need 60. So measure, 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 and that will give you an idea. If you want to replicate the same size, let's say, for example, it was a blanket for your bed, or a, you know, a throw for someone, but you didn't want to have it much bigger than the last one that you made. So be very mindful of your starting count as well of stitches or your chain. Otherwise your project, of course, will be huge, humongous, unless that's what you're aiming for. So for example, I like my amigurumi bigger, so I don't actually adjust anything, so other than obviously the hook size to go with the yarn, the blanket yarn, but I just stick to the exact same count of stitches. So instead of getting a little amigurumi, I get a much bigger one, and I absolutely love that, and that is one of the things that really appeals to me about blanket yarn. Okay, now number 9, very important, guys, and I'm sure that most of you do this. I do this with all my scraps actually, but blanket yarn is so soft and squishy. What am I saying to you? All your little scraps, guys, do not throw them out, because they make awesome stuffing for your amigurumi. So soft and squishy and compactable, so you can either use it on its own, or you can, you know, put it in with your other fiber fill. And it is very, very cheap, because you were just going to throw this out, so you certainly don't want to be doing that. I actually have a vase full of all of my yarn ends, and then what I do is I use it to stuff up my amigurumi, and I've even been known to put it in cushions, and then I refill that as I go. So that is awesome. I think that's a great tip. So make sure that you get in the habit, even if you just have, you don't need anything fancy, or you can make you can crochet a fancy little basket to put them in, or just have a little, you know, Ziploc bag next to you where you're working. I actually keep everything in here, and this sits in there as well, so that way I don't make a mess or lose any of my ends, and I then use them to stuff the amigurumi that I make. So that's actually a very important tip, because you're also saving money. Very important, guys. Now, number 10, and last but not least, it is the best one of all: experiment and have fun. That's what it's all about. Now, like I said earlier, and if I didn't, I'm going to say it now, please share any of your tips and tricks. We all want to know what they are. I'm sure that there are many, many other things that I haven't thought of, and I want to add them to what I do with my blanket yarn, because it's very important that we share, because sharing is caring, as we all know. And also, if you've made any blanket yarn projects, please share that as well, because I love the inspiration, and I know that everybody else who watches and reads the comments absolutely loves that as well. So that's it, guys. They're my 10 little tips and tricks on working with blanket yarn. They're the little things that I found have been very useful along the way, and I apply them pretty much every single time that I crochet with blanket yarn. So thank you so very, very much for hanging out with us. I hope you've enjoyed today's little episode. And until I see you next time, take care, everybody. Bye-bye for now.